I spent 7 years building my dream home, only for my family to destroy it in 17 minutes. They smashed walls as if punishing me for my success. The worst part was not the damage, but their smirk when they claimed I would not call the police because of the baby. They expected mercy. Instead, they unknowingly walked into a trap I had set to strip them of everything they owned by sunset. My name is Mara Hollis, and for the last 10 years, I have made a living saving things that other people consider too broken to fix. As a structural engineer and restoration specialist for Larkspur Heritage Studio, I spend my days standing in the rotting bellies of 18th-century churches or walking the sagging beams of forgotten warehouses, calculating exactly how much load a history can bear before it collapses. I thought I knew everything there was to know about stress fractures. I thought I knew exactly what it sounded like when a foundation finally gave way. I was wrong. The loudest collapse of my life did not happen on a job site. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in Savannah, Georgia, inside the only thing I had ever built entirely for myself. I had been away for just 48 hours on a rapid assessment trip to Charleston, my Victorian home. A Queen Anne beauty nestled deep in the historic district was supposed to be empty. I had closed on the property 6 months ago, pouring every cent of my savings and every ounce of my sanity into it. It was not just a house to me, it was a declaration of independence. It was the physical manifestation of 10 years of missed holidays, overtime shifts, and instant noodle dinners. I had spent weeks hand-scraping layers of cheap linoleum off the original heart pine floors. I had spent thousands of dollars restoring the plaster crown molding that dated back to the 1890s. When my Uber pulled up to the curb, the first thing I noticed was the silence of the street. The Spanish moss hung still from the oaks, heavy with the humidity of the South. It was picture perfect. I dragged my suitcase up the front steps, exhausted but smiling, ready to see the new light fixture I had installed in the foyer before I left. I unlocked the door, expecting the smell of lavender wax and old wood. Instead, I was hit by a wall of white dust. It choked the air, thick and chalky, swirling in the shaft of sunlight coming from the transom window. It tasted like pulverized lime and horsehair. My brain lagged, trying to process the sensory input. Was there a fire? A structural failure? Had the ceiling in the parlor come down? Then I heard it. Wham! The sickening crunch of metal striking wood. Wham! The sound of something irreplaceable splintering into jagged trash. I dropped my suitcase. It hit the porch floor with a thud, but the noise inside drowned it out. I walked into my foyer, my boots crunching on debris that I realized, with a sickening lurch of my stomach, was pieces of my original, hand-carved staircase banister. I turned the corner into the double parlor, the room I had finished painting just 3 days ago. The scene before me looked less like a renovation and more like a crime scene. A thick haze of plaster dust hung in the air. Standing in the center of the room, looking like a demonic conductor of an orchestra of destruction, was my father, Gordon Hollis. He was swinging a 10-pound sledgehammer into the decorative partition wall, a non-load-bearing but historically vital archway that defined the transition between the parlor and the dining room. "Harder, Bryce, it needs to be open concept," Gordon shouted, his face flushed with exertion and a strange, manic joy. To his right, ripping perfectly good heart pine wainscoting off the wall with a crowbar, was my younger brother, Bryce. Wood screamed as nails were torn from the lathe. A pile of debris sat in the center of the room, my velvet armchair, overturned and covered in drywall dust, my vintage rug, bunched up and trampled, and shards of the antique stained glass transom that had survived the Civil War, but apparently could not survive my family. "Stop," I whispered. My voice did not work. The shock was a physical blow to my chest. I tried again, louder. "Stop! What are you doing?" The hammering ceased. Gordon lowered the sledgehammer, resting the heavy iron head on my newly refinished floors. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand and looked at me. He did not look guilty. He did not look startled. He looked annoyed that I had interrupted. "Mara," he said, breathing heavy, "you're back early. We wanted to have the demo done before you got home. Surprise. Demo? I choked out the word. I looked at the hole in the wall. The jagged edges of the lath strips looked like broken ribs. This isn't a demo. This is my house. You are destroying my house. We're opening it up, Bryce said, tossing the crowbar onto the pile of my ruined furniture. He kicked a piece of molding aside. This layout is garbage. Too many small rooms. We're making it a great room. You know, for the family. The family doesn't live here, I said, my voice rising, shaking with a rage so hot it felt cold. I live here. Just me. I didn't ask for this. I didn't hire you. Get out. Gordon chuckled. It was a low, patronizing sound that I had heard my entire life. It was the sound he made when I said I wanted to study engineering instead of nursing. It was the sound he made when I said I was moving away. Don't be dramatic. Mara, we're doing you a favor. This place was a museum. It needs to be a home. Besides, we need the space. We? Gordon stepped aside, revealing the corner of the room near the bay window. Tessa, Bryce's girlfriend, was standing there. She was clutching her baby bump with both hands, her eyes wide and darting around the room. She looked terrified, but she also looked like she was waiting for a cue. She was covered in a fine layer of white dust, looking like a ghost in a tragedy she didn't write but agreed to star in. Tessa? I looked at her, then back at the destruction. You brought a pregnant woman into a construction zone without ventilation? Are you insane? She needs a place to stay. Mara, Gordon said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious and threatening. Bryce's lease is up. They need stability. This house is too big for one selfish girl. We're making an in-law suite downstairs. This wall had to go. I stared at him. The audacity was so immense it was almost impressive. They hadn't just broken in to vandalize. They had broken in to colonize. They were reconfiguring my property to suit their needs, assuming I would just roll over and accept it because that is what I had always done. I was the fixer. I was the one who smoothed things over. But looking at the shattered stained glass on the floor, glass that had caught the morning light in a way that made me feel, for the first time in years, at peace, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap like the wood. It was a silent, clean break. Get out, I said. My voice was deadly quiet. Get out of my house, now! Gordon smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that weaponized biology. He gestured toward Tessa, who flinched. You wouldn't dare kick out a pregnant woman, he said. Not in her condition, not family. He picked up the sledgehammer again, confident he had played the winning card. He turned his back to me and swung it at the remaining stud. Crack. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge at him. I didn't beg. The Mara who used to beg for their approval died the moment that hammer hit the floor. I turned around and walked out the front door. I marched down the stairs, past the debris I had stepped over earlier, and stood on the sidewalk. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I did not call my mother. I did not call a friend to vent. I dialed 911. Emergency. What is the location of your emergency? The dispatcher asked. 304 East Gaston Street, I said, my voice devoid of tears. I sounded like I was giving a site report on a failed truss. I need to report a break-in in progress. Multiple intruders. They are currently inside destroying the property with heavy tools. I believe they are armed with sledgehammers and crowbars. Are you safe, ma'am? I am on the sidewalk. They are inside. Do you know the intruders? I paused for 1 second. I looked up at the window of my parlor. I could see the silhouette of my brother ripping down the curtains I had sewn by hand. They are unauthorized individuals causing severe property damage, I said. Please hurry. I waited. It took 6 minutes for the police to arrive. In those 6 minutes, I did not go back inside. I stood like a statue, watching the dust billow out of my front door. When the first cruiser arrived, blue lights flashing against the Spanish moss, the neighbors had started to come out onto their porches. 2 officers stepped out, hands on their holsters. "Stay here, ma'am," the officer said as he passed me. They went up the stairs. I heard shouting. I heard Gordon's booming voice, outraged and confused. "Profound misunderstanding," I heard him yell. Then I heard the distinct metallic click of handcuffs. Gordon and Bryce were marched out a moment later. Bryce looked pale, sweating profusely, the dust on his face streaked with panic. Gordon looked furious. His face was a mask of indignation. He was still wearing his work gloves. "This is my daughter's house," Gordon bellowed at the officer, shoving him toward the cruiser. "Tell them, Mara, tell them we're helping you." I stood with my arms crossed, leaning against the wrought iron fence. I didn't say a word. I just watched. Tessa came out last, not in handcuffs, but sobbing hysterically. An officer was guiding her by the elbow. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, but I saw the truth there. She had stood and watched. She had let them destroy my sanctuary because she wanted the master suite. Then, tires screeched. A minivan swerved around the corner and slammed on the brakes, parking crookedly in the middle of the street. My mother, Elaine Hollis. She flew out of the car before it had even fully stopped rocking. She was wearing her Sunday cardigan and a look of absolute hysteria. She ran toward the police car where they were pushing Bryce into the back seat. "Stop! Stop it!" she shrieked, throwing herself between the officer and the car door. "That is my son. That is my husband. What are you doing? They are family. You can't arrest family for fixing a house." The officer grabbed her arm to move her back. "Ma'am, step back, or you will be detained for obstruction." Elaine spun around and locked eyes with me. Her face twisted from panic to accusation in a split second. "Mara, stop this. Tell them. Tell them right now to let your father go. Have you lost your mind?" The officer looked at me. "Ma'am, do these men have permission to be here? Is this a civil dispute?" This was the moment, the trapdoor. If I said yes, if I hesitated, they would walk away. They would sleep in my house tonight. They would win. I looked at the officer, then at Elaine. I remembered the notification on my phone from 2 hours ago, a text from my mother. "Officer," I said, my voice cutting through the humid air like a scalpel, "I want to press charges for felony vandalism and breaking and entering, and I want you to note that woman as an accomplice." Elaine's mouth dropped open. "What?" "She has the spare key," I said, pointing at her. "I never gave it to them. She stole it from my emergency contact, and at 10:30 this morning, she sent a text to my brother's phone. I saw it on the counter when I walked in before they started smashing things. It said, 'Code is 4599. Make sure you get the wall down before she gets back so she can't say no.'" The silence that followed was heavy. The officer looked at Elaine. Elaine looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. She wasn't looking at her daughter. She was looking at a witness. "That is a lie," Elaine screeched, but her hand instinctively went to her pocket where her phone was. "Check her phone," I said calmly. "It is all there. They conspired to destroy my property. Take them away." I turned my back on them as the officer reached for Elaine's wrist. I looked up at my house, bleeding dust onto the porch. It was broken. It was violated. But as the police car doors slammed shut, sealing my family inside a cage of their own making, I knew one thing for certain. The demolition was over. The war had just begun. The silence that descended on the house after the police cruisers pulled away was heavier than the noise of the sledgehammers had been. It was a dense, suffocating quiet, amplified by the fact that my front door was now hanging off its top hinge, a casualty of the officers forcing it wider to drag my father out. I did not sit down. I did not cry. Crying implies a loss that can be grieved. But what I felt standing in the wreckage of my parlor was not grief. It was clarity. Cold, sharp, absolute clarity. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, but not to call anyone. I switched it to camera mode. I walked back into the house, stepping over the splintered remains of the heart pine wainscoting. My breathing was steady. I treated the scene not as my home, but as a site inspection for a catastrophic failure. This was what I did for a living. I assessed damage. I calculated the cost of negligence. I started at the entryway. I filmed the gouges in the floorboards where the heavy work boots had stomped in. I photographed the shattered remains of the transom window, the colored glass reducing the sunlight to jagged shards of red and blue on the dusty floor. I moved to the partition wall. I took close-up shots of the severed electrical wiring that was dangling from the open drywall, sparking a potential fire hazard that my father, in his demolition frenzy, had completely ignored. As I documented the destruction, my mind began to drift backward, replaying the tape of my life with the Hollis family. For years, Gordon and Elaine had told me that my obsession with old houses was a waste of money. When I bought this place, they called it a money pit. They said I was arrogant for thinking I could restore a piece of Savannah history on a single income. "Why do you need all that space?" my mother had asked, her voice dripping with judgment. "It is just you. You are going to be a lonely old woman in a haunted museum." Yet, the moment I made it beautiful, the moment I turned their money pit into a jewel, they decided it was community property. They never treated Bryce like that. Bryce, the golden boy. Bryce, who had changed college majors 5 times in 6 years. Bryce, who was always finding himself while I was finding steady employment. I walked into the kitchen, which was thankfully untouched, and opened my laptop. The dust had settled on the keyboard, a fine white powder that I wiped away with a trembling finger. I logged into my encrypted cloud drive and opened a file I had named The Ledger. It was a spreadsheet I had started 7 years ago. The first time I paid off a credit card bill for Bryce because my mother called me weeping, saying the collectors were threatening to sue him. I scrolled down the columns. Row 4. $5,000 for Bryce's tuition supplement when he lost his scholarship due to academic probation. Row 12. $3,200 for legal fees when he got a DUI in Florida. Row 20. $8,000 for the revolutionary e-commerce startup that failed in 3 months because he spent the inventory budget on a trip to Cabo. Row 35. 4 months of rent for his apartment in Atlanta because he quit his job without notice to pursue being a DJ. I highlighted the total sum at the bottom. $142,650. I stared at the number. That was the down payment on a second property. That was my retirement fund. That was the price of my silence. I realized then that I had been groomed. I was not raised to be a daughter. I was raised to be an insurance policy. My parents had trained me to equate family with sacrifice, but only my sacrifice. I was the load-bearing wall they kept drilling into, assuming I would never crack. Today, they swung the hammer one too many times. My phone on the counter buzzed, then it buzzed again, and again, a continuous vibration rattling against the marble countertop. I picked it up. The screen was lit up with notifications from a group chat named Hollis Family Core. Elaine had sent a photo. It was a grainy black and white ultrasound image. Below it, a message. "This is who you just kicked out onto the street, your own nephew. I hope you are proud of yourself. Mara, you chose wood and plaster over flesh and blood." Then a message from Bryce, sent from what I assumed was the holding cell, or maybe he had already been bailed out. "Tessa is having contractions from the stress. If she loses this baby, it is on you. You are a monster." They were rewriting the narrative in real time. They were pivoting from invaders to victims within an hour of being arrested. I opened Facebook. I knew Elaine. She lived for the court of public opinion. There it was, posted 12 minutes ago. A picture of Elaine, eyes red-rimmed, standing outside the police station. The caption read, "I never thought I would see the day my own daughter would have her father and brother arrested. We went to surprise her, to help her fix up her home for the new baby coming into the family, and she turned it into a war zone. She cares more about her fancy walls than her struggling brother. We are sitting on the curb, confused and heartbroken. Please pray for us." The comments were already pouring in. "That is despicable," wrote one of her church friends. "Some people let money rot their souls," wrote a cousin I had not spoken to in 10 years. "How can someone do that to a pregnant woman?" wrote a stranger. I felt a surge of nausea, but I swallowed it down. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I wanted to scream. I wanted to post the video of Gordon swinging the sledgehammer. I wanted to upload the spreadsheet showing the 6 figures of debt I had covered. I wanted to explain that they had broken in. But I stopped. This was a trap. If I engaged, if I argued, it became a domestic dispute. It became, he said, she said. It became emotional. And in an emotional fight, the crying mother and the pregnant woman always win. They did not come here to visit. They did not even come here just to live. They came here to occupy. They knew exactly what they were doing. They intended to create a situation so messy, so publicly embarrassing, that I would be forced to let them stay just to make the noise stop. They were banking on my shame. They were leveraging the fact that I was a private person who hated conflict. I put the phone down. I did not reply. I did not delete the post. Instead, I created a new folder on my desktop. I named it Evidence. I took screenshots of Elaine's post. I took screenshots of every single comment, capturing the names and timestamps. I screenshot the text messages from Bryce threatening me with the baby's health. I screenshot the ultrasound photo sent as a tool of manipulation. I was an engineer. When a building is compromised, you do not paint over the cracks. You do not argue with the bricks. You expose the foundation. You bring in the inspectors. You follow the code. My family had made a fatal error. They thought they were dealing with Mara, the pushover daughter who sat quietly at Thanksgiving dinner while they made jokes about her single status. They thought they were dealing with a family member who could be guilt-tripped into submission. They were wrong. They were now dealing with the owner of a compromised asset. I looked at the hole in my wall again. The dust was settling, revealing the jagged teeth of the lath. It was ugly. It was expensive. But it was also clear. I walked to the front door and pushed it shut as best as I could, propping a heavy chair against it to keep it closed. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of tap water. I drank it standing up, staring at the timeline of events I was already constructing in my head. Elaine wanted a public fight? She would get a legal siege. Structural integrity is compromised, I said aloud to the empty room. My voice was steady, devoid of the tremor that had been there an hour ago. Standard protocol applies. Isolate the failure, mitigate the risk, remove the load. I was not going to play the daughter anymore. I was going to play the plaintiff. And in the court of law, tears do not count as evidence. Timestamps do. The next morning, the air in my house smelled like pulverized drywall and stale betrayal. I had not slept. I had spent the hours between midnight and dawn sitting on a folding chair in the kitchen, listening to the house settle, waiting for the other shoe to drop. At 8 o'clock sharp, Noah Granger arrived. I had hired Noah based on a recommendation from a structural engineer I trusted in Atlanta. Noah was not a contractor. He was a forensic damage assessor who specialized in historic properties and insurance fraud. He was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite, with eyes that missed nothing and a personality that was entirely devoid of small talk. He walked through the front door, stepped over the yellow caution tape I had strung up myself, and didn't even blink at the devastation in the parlor. He just clicked his pen and opened a thick leather binder. "You said family did this?" Noah asked, his voice flat. "Yes," I replied, following him. "My father and brother." Noah walked to the center of the room, looking at the jagged remains of the partition wall. He didn't touch anything yet. He took out a laser measure and a high-resolution camera. He began to circle the pile of debris like a shark. "Interesting," he muttered after 20 minutes of silence. "What is?" I asked. I was holding a cup of black coffee, my hands finally steady. Noah pointed to the severed studs in the wall. "Look at these cuts. This wasn't a rage room incident. If someone just wants to smash a wall, they take a sledgehammer to the drywall and kick through the studs. It is messy. It is random." He crouched down, shining a flashlight on the base of a support beam that had been partially sawed through. "This cut here? This was made with a reciprocating saw. And look at the angle. They cut the king stud, but they left the jack stud intact just enough to hold the weight temporarily." I frowned, leaning in. Why would they do that? Noah stood up and looked at me. Because if they just smashed it, the ceiling would have sagged immediately, and you would just patch it. But by cutting the structural integrity of the header, they created a ticking time bomb. To fix this, you can't just put up new drywall. You have to shore up the second floor, install a temporary steel beam, remove the entire compromised section, and reframe the load path. He paused, letting the information sink in. This turns a $500 drywall patch into a $30,000 structural renovation. They didn't just want an open concept, Ms. Hollis. They wanted a construction site. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty room. They wanted to maximize the damage? They wanted to maximize the budget, Noah corrected. Which brings me to my next question. He flipped a page in his binder. Where is the permit packet for the HELOC? I stared at him. The what? The home equity line of credit, Noah said, looking up. I pulled the property records this morning before I came over. Standard procedure to see if there were existing liens or permits. The county records show a permit application filed 10 days ago for a major structural alteration to the ground floor, listing a secured line of credit from Coastal Heritage Credit Union as the funding source. The coffee cup in my hand felt suddenly very heavy. Noah, I said slowly, I don't have a line of credit. I paid for this house in cash. I have zero debt on this property. I never applied for a loan. Noah's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted. He went from assessor to investigator in a split second. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. I have a contact at the clerk's office, he said. I had them fax over the filing paperwork because the scope of work description looked suspicious. You need to see this. He handed me the document. It was a standard application for a secured loan. Using my house, my paid-off, historic Victorian home, as 100% collateral. The requested amount was $150,000. My eyes scanned the page, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Applicant: Mara Elizabeth Hollis, Social Security number, mine, date of birth, mine. And there, at the bottom of page 4, was the signature. Mara E. Hollis. It was a terrifyingly good forgery. It had the same sharp loop on the M that I used. It had the slight slant to the right. To a bank teller, it would look perfect. But my eyes drifted to the date next to the signature. October 14th. October 14th, I whispered. I wasn't here. Are you sure? Noah asked, his pen poised over his notebook. I am positive, I said, my voice hardening. I was in Charleston on the 14th. I was doing a site visit for the St. Jude Church restoration. I was on a scaffolding 200 miles away from here from 8 in the morning until 6 at night. I have flight records. I have hotel receipts. I have a time-stamped log from the job site. So, physically impossible for you to be signing loan documents in a Savannah bank branch, Noah noted, writing it down. Physically impossible, I confirmed. Look at the witness line, Noah said quietly. I moved my eyes to the line below the borrower's signature, the witness section, the person who legally verifies that they saw the borrower sign the document. Gordon Hollis. My father's signature was not forged. It was his erratic, heavy-handed scrawl. He had stood in a bank, or in front of a notary, and watched someone, maybe my mother in a wig, maybe just a compliant banker he had charmed, sign my name. He had legally vouched for a lie that put a lien on my entire life. He witnessed it, I said, the papers shaking in my hands. He didn't just break my wall. He stole my equity. It gets worse, Noah said. He pointed to the section labeled Disbursement Instructions. Usually, a renovation loan pays out to the homeowner or directly to the contractor as work is completed. Approved contractor, Miller Construct and Design, initial draw request, $40,000 for demolition and material procurement. Miller Construct, I read aloud. The name sounded familiar, scratching at the back of my brain. Who is Miller Construct? I looked them up, Noah said. LLC formed 3 weeks ago. Registered agent is a Jared Miller. The name clicked. Jared Miller. Bryce's best friend from high school, the one who had been fired from 3 different job sites for drinking on the job, the one who still owed me $200 for breaking my window at a barbecue 4 years ago. The entire picture snapped into focus with blinding, horrifying clarity. It wasn't just about moving in. It wasn't just about the baby. This was a heist. They planned to move into my house. They planned to use the renovation of the wall they destroyed as a pretext to trigger the loan. The bank would release $40,000 to Jared Miller, money that would undoubtedly be split between Bryce, Jared, and my parents. They would live here rent-free, destroy my home, and strip mine the equity I had built, leaving me with a $150,000 debt and a wrecked house. And because Gordon was the witness, and Bryce was the tenant, and they were family, they thought I would never prosecute. They thought I would just pay the bill to keep the peace. "This is not vandalism," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow, distant, and terrifyingly calm. "This is grand larceny. This is identity theft. This is bank fraud. This is conspiracy." "Yes," Noah said. "It is a federal crime." He looked at me, waiting for the breakdown, waiting for the daughter to cry about how her father betrayed her. But the daughter didn't show up. The engineer did. "Noah," I said, looking him in the eye, "I want you to document everything, every nail hole, every saw cut. I want you to write a report that proves the damage was calculated to trigger a high-cost repair. I want you to overlay the damage with the loan disbursement schedule." "I can do that," Noah said. "And I want it time-stamped," I continued, my mind racing through the logistics. "I want the metadata locked. I want this report saved on 3 different cloud servers. I want hard copies notarized. Because when I walk into the district attorney's office, I am not going to be a girl complaining about her family. I am going to be a victim of organized financial crime delivering a case wrapped in a bow." Noah finally cracked a small, grim smile. He closed his binder. "I will have the preliminary report ready by tonight. You might want to call the bank's fraud department before you call the cops again." "Oh, I am going to do more than call them," I said, looking at the forged signature of my name next to my father's. "I am going to hand-deliver the evidence that sends them to prison." I looked back at the hole in the wall. Yesterday, it had looked like a wound. Today, it looked like a smoking gun. They had tried to destroy my home to fill their pockets. Now, I was going to use the debris to bury them. I did not hire 1 lawyer. I hired 2. To win a war, you do not use a sniper rifle to blow up a bridge, and you do not use dynamite to take out a target. You need specific tools for specific destructions. So, at 9 in the morning on Wednesday, I sat in a conference room that smelled of lemon polish and billable hours, looking at the 2 people who were going to help me dismantle my family's life. To my left was Sarah Jenkins, a civil litigator who had a reputation for extracting settlements from stones. She was there to get my money back and ensure my house was restored. To my right was Marcus Thorne, a criminal defense attorney I had retained not to defend me, but to guide me through the process of acting as the complaining witness in a felony prosecution. "We need to bifurcate the strategy," I said, sliding the binder Noah had prepared across the mahogany table. "The police arrested them for vandalism and trespassing. That is the tip of the iceberg. The real issue is the bank fraud." Marcus opened the file, his eyes scanning the forged signature. "This is solid," he said, his voice deep and reassuring. "But the police are going to drag their feet on the fraud charges. They hate financial crimes between family members. They call it a civil matter and try to close the file. We need to force their hand." "How?" I asked. "We do not wait for the police detective to request the bank records," Marcus said. "We serve the bank ourselves. We trigger their internal investigation. Federal banking regulations are stricter than local police protocols. If the bank flags it as fraud, the police have to follow." "And while Marcus handles the jail time," Sarah interjected, tapping her pen on the table, "I am filing for an ex parte emergency protective order today." "On what grounds?" I asked. "They are already out on bail." "Imminent threat of financial and physical harm," Sarah said. "We have the texts from Bryce threatening you. We have the unauthorized entry. We have the destruction of property. We are asking for a no-contact order that includes digital communication. If they text you, they go back to jail. If they post about you tagging your location, they go back to jail. We are cutting off their supply lines." I nodded. It was clean. It was logical. It was ruthless. "Do it," I said. By 11 o'clock, I was on the phone with the fraud department of the Coastal Heritage Credit Union. I did not sound angry. I sounded like a structural engineer reporting a critical failure. "My name is Mara Hollis," I said to the investigator, a woman named Beverly, who sounded tired until I gave her the case number. "I am calling to report unauthorized activity on a home equity line of credit application in my name. I am currently holding a notarized affidavit stating that I was in Charleston, South Carolina, on October 14th, the date the documents were signed." "I see the application here," Beverly said, the typing on her end sounding like machine gun fire. It was flagged for review because of the large initial draw request, but the signatures matched the file. "They are forgeries," I said, "and I have flight logs, hotel receipts, and a time-stamped work log to prove I was 200 miles away. I am also informing you that the witness to the signature, Gordon Hollis, is currently facing felony charges for destroying the collateral property." The typing stopped. "Destroying the collateral?" Beverly asked. "He took a sledgehammer to the living room 2 days ago," I said. "The police report number is Savannah PD case 49220. I suggest you freeze the funds immediately. Beverly, unless the credit union wants to be liable for disbursing $40,000 to a contractor owned by the co-conspirator." "I am freezing the account now," Beverly said, her voice sharp and alert. "We will open a formal investigation. Do not speak to the branch manager. I will handle this from corporate." I hung up. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to walk into it. The first rat to smell the cheese was Bryce. At 1 in the afternoon, my phone pinged. It was a text message. "You think you are smart calling the cops? Tessa was in the hospital all morning with high blood pressure. If anything happens to this baby, I am suing you for intentional infliction of emotional distress. You created a hostile environment. We are going to own that house by the time the court is done with you." I stared at the screen. A lawsuit for emotional distress? It was laughable. It was the legal equivalent of a toddler throwing a toy car at a tank, but it revealed their strategy. They were going to use the pregnancy as a shield and a sword. They wanted me to panic. They wanted me to feel guilty. I typed nothing. I took a screenshot. I uploaded it to the evidence folder under a subfolder named Harassment. I did not hate Tessa. I did not even know her well enough to hate her. But I separated the biology from the crime. A pregnancy is a medical condition. It is not a license to commit grand larceny. If a bank robber is pregnant, she is still a bank robber. If my brother was using an unborn child as leverage to steal my home, he was the one endangering his family, not me. Then came the call from Elaine. I let it go to voicemail first. Then she called again immediately. I knew I needed to answer, not to talk, but to listen. In the state of Georgia, you can record a conversation if one party consents, and that party was me. I pressed the record button on my external dictaphone and answered on speaker. "Mara?" Elaine's voice was wet and trembling. She was using her church mother voice, the one she used when she wanted to guilt the congregation into donating to the building fund. "I am here," I said. "Oh, thank God," she sobbed. "Mara, honey, this has all gone too far. Your father is sitting here in the kitchen staring at the wall. He is heartbroken. He was just trying to help you fix up that old place. He forged my signature on a $150,000 loan." "Mom," I said. "It was just paperwork," she cried out, her tone shifting from sad to frantic. "Technicalities. We intended to pay it back. The market is hard right now, and Bryce needed a start. We are family. We share." "That is not sharing," I said. "That is theft." "Listen to me." Elaine lowered her voice. "We can fix this. I spoke to your father. We are willing to forgive you for the arrest." I almost laughed. "You are willing to forgive me?" "Yes," she said, rushing on. We will drop the issue. We won't sue for Tessa's stress. All you have to do is go down to the station and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave us permission but you forgot. And then—" She paused. "And then what?" I asked. "And then just make a little post on Facebook," she said, her voice sweet and poisonous. "Just a small apology. Say you were overreacting because of work stress. Say you are sorry for embarrassing the family. That is all. We just need to clear our name so Gordon doesn't lose his standing at the club." The room went cold. It wasn't about the jail time. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the narrative. If I apologized publicly, if I admitted to overreacting or forgetting, I would destroy my own credibility. I would be painting myself as the unstable, hysterical daughter, and if I did that, the bank would look at my fraud claim and see a messy domestic dispute instead of a crime. If I apologized, my testimony in court would be worthless. They were not asking for peace. They were asking me to hand them the murder weapon so they could shoot me with it later. "I will not be doing that," I said. "Mara, do not be stubborn," Elaine snapped, the tears vanishing instantly. "You are ruining your reputation. Everyone is saying you are mentally unstable. I am trying to save you." "I have to go, Mom," I said. "If you don't fix this," she hissed, "you will never be welcome in this family again." "I know," I said, and I hung up. I saved the recording. I named it Elaine Coercion Attempt 01. But something she said nagged at me. We intended to pay it back. It implied a plan. It implied they had thought this through. I thought about the key. On the day of the break-in, I had asked myself how they got in. I hadn't given them a key. The lockbox was empty. I walked out to my front porch and looked down the street. 3 houses down lived Mrs. Gable, a sweet elderly woman who watered my plants when I was out of town. She was the only person who had a spare key. I walked over to her house. Mrs. Gable was in her garden, deadheading roses. "Mara," she waved, looking concerned. "I saw the police cars yesterday. Is everything all right? I saw your mother earlier that day. She seemed so excited." I froze. "You saw my mother?" "Yes, dear," Mrs. Gable said, wiping her hands on her apron. "She came by around 10 in the morning. She said she was your mother. Such a nice lady. She said you had called her and asked her to come early to surprise you with some renovations, but you had forgotten to leave the key under the mat." My stomach turned over. "She said she didn't want to bother you at work," Mrs. Gable continued. "She knew I had the spare. She showed me a text message on her phone that looked like it was from you. It said, 'Mom is coming. Give her the key.' So I gave it to her. Did I do wrong?" I gently took Mrs. Gable's hand. "No, Mrs. Gable, you didn't do anything wrong. You were tricked." "Tricked?" she asked, her eyes widening. "Mrs. Gable," I said, "would you be willing to sign a piece of paper stating exactly what you just told me? That she came here, claimed she had my permission, and showed you a fake text message?" "Well, I suppose," she said, looking flustered. "If it helps." "It helps more than you know," I said. I walked back to my house with a sense of grim satisfaction. This changed everything. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This wasn't a family stopping by and deciding to stay. This was premeditated burglary. Elaine had spoofed a text message. She had targeted a vulnerable neighbor. She had socially engineered her way into my home hours before they picked up the sledgehammers. This proved intent. I walked back into my kitchen. My phone was buzzing again. Notification after notification. Facebook tags. Instagram comments. Elaine was ramping up the pressure. My daughter has had a mental break. One post read, "We are praying for Mara to find Jesus and forgiveness." Read another. The urge to defend myself was a physical ache. I wanted to post the audio of Elaine begging me to lie. I wanted to post the affidavit from Mrs. Gable. I wanted to scream the truth from the rooftops. But I remembered the chessboard. When your opponent is making a mistake, you do not interrupt them. Elaine was building a public case that I was crazy. She was putting all her chips on the emotional dispute square. She had no idea that I was playing on a completely different board. I did not post. I did not comment. I did not like or share. I went dark. Let them think they were winning the social media war. Let them think I was cowering in my ruined house, afraid of their judgment. Let them scream into the void. Because while they were typing status updates, I was finalizing the package for the district attorney. And when the bank completed its investigation, when the forensic accounting came back, when the neighbor's testimony was notarized, I wouldn't need a Facebook post. I would have an indictment. On Thursday afternoon. My phone rang. The screen displayed Dad, a word that used to conjure images of sawdust and safety lessons, but now just made my stomach tighten with a cold, chemical dread. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I needed to make sure the recording app was running. "Mara," Gordon said. His voice was unsettlingly calm. The rage from the demolition was gone, replaced by a smooth, transactional tone that I recognized from his days selling insurance. "We need to talk, not on the phone, in person." "I have a restraining order pending." "Gordon," I said, stripping the title of Dad from my vocabulary. My lawyer advised against contact. "We just want to settle this," he said, ignoring my legal threat. "Bryce left his tools at the house, expensive tools, and your mother is sick with worry. We want to sign a paper, agree to cover the drywall repairs, and put this behind us. We are prepared to offer you a settlement." A settlement. The word hung in the air like a bad joke. They had nothing to settle with. They were broke. That was the whole reason they had tried to steal my house in the first place. "I am not meeting you at the house," I said, "and I am not meeting you at your place." "There is an office building on Abercorn Street," Gordon suggested quickly, as if he had rehearsed it. "They rent conference rooms by the hour, neutral ground, 4 o'clock, just us. We sign the agreement, we get the tools, and we walk away." I stared at the wall I was currently patching. "Fine," I said. 4 o'clock, but if you are 1 minute late, I leave." I hung up. I did not go back to patching the wall. Instead, I called Detective Miller, the fraud investigator from the Savannah Police Department who had finally been assigned my case after the bank flagged the file. "They want to meet," I told him. "They want to settle." "Do not go," Miller said immediately. "It is volatile." "I have to go," I said, "because I need them to admit they knew about the loan in front of a witness, and I need you to be there." There was a pause on the line. "Where and when?" Miller asked. I gave him the address. "I will rent 2 rooms," I said. "Conference room A and conference room B. They are connected by a thin partition wall. You be in B. We will be in A." "Ms. Hollis," Miller said, his voice dropping. "If this goes south, we are coming in, but we need probable cause or a confession to nail the conspiracy charge right now." "You will get it," I promised. I arrived at the office building at 3:45. I paid for both rooms in cash. I let Detective Miller and a representative from the bank's fraud unit into the adjoining room. I checked the soundproofing. It was cheap office construction. If voices were raised, and I knew they would be, every word would be audible. At 4 o'clock exactly, the elevator doors slid open. I had expected Gordon, maybe Bryce. I did not expect the entire clan. Gordon led the way, wearing a blazer that was slightly too tight. Trying to project an air of authority, Elaine followed, clutching her purse with white knuckles, wearing a floral dress that looked suitable for a funeral. Bryce slouched behind her, looking sullen and hungover, and trailing at the back was Tessa. They had brought the pregnant girlfriend. Of course they had. She was the visual prop. She looked exhausted, her face pale, her hands resting protectively on her stomach. They filed into the small, gray-carpeted conference room. Gordon pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down, spreading his arms wide as if he were the CEO presiding over a merger. Elaine and Bryce sat on his left. Tessa sank into a chair near the door, looking like she wanted to disappear. I did not sit. I stood at the opposite end of the table, my hands resting on the back of the chair. I was wearing my sight boots and a structured blazer. I loomed over them. "You brought a crowd," I said. "It is a family matter," Gordon said, gesturing to the empty seats. "Sit down. Mara, you are making people nervous." I prefer to stand, I replied. You said you wanted to settle, talk. Gordon cleared his throat. He pulled a folded piece of notebook paper from his pocket. Now, look, things got heated the other day. We admit that. Bryce was overzealous with the renovation. We are willing to overlook your hysteria involving the police. I blinked. You are willing to overlook it? We are family, Elaine chimed in, her voice trembling. We forgive you for embarrassing us. Mara, we really do. Here is the deal, Gordon said, tapping the paper. We will agree to fix the wall ourselves. Bryce and I can have it back up in a weekend. In exchange, you drop the charges, you lift this ridiculous restraining order, and you sign a document stating that the police report was a misunderstanding. We also want the spare key back. He looked at me with total confidence. He actually believed this was a good offer. He thought he could barter labor he wasn't qualified to do in exchange for felony forgiveness. And the baby? Bryce muttered, looking at the table. I want an apology for stressing Tessa out. I looked at Tessa. She didn't look up. She was staring at her hands. So, I said, keeping my voice level, your offer is that you fix the damage you caused, and I forget that you broke into my home? It is a fair trade, Gordon said. Plus, we need to discuss the living arrangements. Obviously, we can't move in until the dust settles, but… Stop, I said. The word was not loud, but it had the density of concrete. The room went silent. You are not moving in, I said. You are never stepping foot on my property again, and you are not fixing the wall. Gordon's face reddened. Now listen here, young lady. No, I cut him off. You listen. I reached into my leather portfolio. I did not pull out a settlement agreement. I pulled out a photocopy of the HELOC application. I slid it across the polished wood table. It spun perfectly, stopping right in front of Gordon. I don't care about the drywall. Gordon, I said, I care about the $150,000. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. Gordon looked down. He didn't touch the paper. He didn't have to. He knew exactly what it was. Bryce craned his neck to look. His face went from sullen to the color of old ash. Dad, he whispered, Is that the bank thing? Elaine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mara, you weren't supposed to see that. I wasn't supposed to see a loan application taken out in my name, I asked, my voice rising just enough to carry through the wall. I wasn't supposed to see that you put my house up as collateral. I wasn't supposed to see that you forged my signature. It was a bridge loan, Gordon blurted out, slamming his hand on the table. The calm facade shattered. It was just to get us liquidity. We were going to pay it back once Bryce's business took off. You have the credit. Mara, you have the asset. You weren't using the equity. It is selfish to sit on that much value when your family is drowning. So you stole it, I said. We borrowed it, Gordon roared. I witnessed the signature because I knew you would have signed it if you weren't so stingy. I did it for the family. You committed forgery, I said. You committed bank fraud. And you, I pointed at Bryce. You listed your best friend as the contractor so you could siphon the $40,000 draw request. You weren't going to renovate. You were going to cash out. Bryce stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. You can't prove that. Jared is a legitimate contractor. Jared Miller has a suspended license and 2 lawsuits for unfinished work, I fired back. And the bank knows. I spoke to them yesterday. The account is frozen. Bryce, the money is gone. Bryce looked like he had been punched in the gut. He slumped back down. No, he moaned. No, I promised Jared, you… Elaine stood up now, tears streaming down her face, reaching across the table. Mara, please don't call the bank. Just cancel the loan. We will tear up the papers. Just let it go. Your father. He has a reputation. He can't go to jail. He is an old man. He is a criminal, I said. Gordon stood up, his face purple. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You ungrateful little witch. After everything we provided for you? You dare threaten me with the bank? I am your father. I own you. That house is mine because I raised you. You don't own me, I said. And you don't own my house, but you do own that signature. I pointed to the document one last time. This isn't a family misunderstanding, Gordon, I said, delivering the line I had rehearsed in the dark of my kitchen. This is federal bank fraud. Minimum sentence is not a timeout. It is 30 years. You wouldn't, Gordon sneered. You don't have the guts. You are alone here. Mara, it is 4 against 1. Who is going to believe you over your whole family? I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. I am not alone, I said. I turned my head toward the partition wall. Detective, I think that is a confession. The door to the adjoining room opened. It didn't swing open dramatically. It just opened, efficient and terrifying. Detective Miller walked in, badge on his belt, followed by 2 uniformed officers and a woman in a gray suit holding a recording device. The air left the room. Gordon froze. His finger was still pointing at me, but his hand began to tremble uncontrollably. Elaine let out a sound that was half scream, half whimper, and collapsed back into her chair. Gordon Hollis, Detective Miller said, walking straight to the head of the table. Elaine Hollis, Bryce Hollis, I am placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery. No, Elaine shrieked. No, we were just talking. It is a family meeting. We heard everything, ma'am, Miller said. Turn around, hands behind your back. The chaos was instant. The officers moved in. Bryce tried to bolt for the door, but the second officer blocked him, spinning him around and slamming him against the wall. The sound of cuffs ratcheting shut filled the small room. Gordon didn't fight. He just stared at me. His eyes were wide, shocked, as if the furniture had suddenly come alive and bitten him. He couldn't process that his authority meant nothing here. You set us up, Gordon hissed as the officer pulled his arms back. Your own blood. You drew first blood, I said. I just stopped the bleeding. I looked over at the corner. Tessa was still sitting there. She hadn't moved. She hadn't made a sound. She was clutching her stomach, her eyes wide, darting between Bryce being searched against the wall and Gordon being read his Miranda rights. The female fraud investigator stepped toward her. Ma'am, are you Tessa Vance? Tessa nodded, tears finally spilling over. You are listed as a beneficiary on some of the transfer documents found in Bryce Hollis's email, the investigator said. We need to question you. Tessa looked at Bryce. Bryce was looking at the floor, muttering curses. He didn't look at her. He didn't ask if she was okay. He was worried about himself. Then she looked at me. I held her gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't offer comfort. I just looked at her with the steady, unwavering gaze of someone who had finally cleared the debris. Tessa's voice cracked. She stood up, her legs shaking. I didn't sign anything. I didn't know they forged the name. They told me Mara gave them the house. Shut up, Tessa, Bryce yelled from the wall. Don't say anything. Tessa flinched. She looked at the man she was having a child with, the man who was currently in handcuffs for stealing from his sister. Then she looked at the police officer. I want a lawyer, Tessa whispered, and I want to tell you everything they talked about in the car on the way over here. Tessa, Elaine screamed. Traitor! Take them out, Detective Miller ordered. I stood still as my family was marched out of the conference room. I didn't look away. I watched every second of it. I watched the realization sink in that they hadn't just lost a house. They had lost their freedom. When the room was finally empty, save for me and the table with the loan application still sitting in the center, I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 7 years. I picked up the paper. I folded it neatly. I put it back in my portfolio. The meeting had lasted 17 minutes, exactly the same amount of time it had taken them to destroy my parlor. Justice, I thought, had a sense of symmetry. The air in the conference room had shifted from the stale scent of office carpet to the sharp, metallic tang of adrenaline. Detective Miller stood at the head of the table, his badge catching the fluorescent light, while a uniformed officer read the Miranda rights from a laminated card, The words were monotone, rhythmic, and devastatingly final. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. My father, Gordon, was the first to try to break the rhythm. He twisted his upper body, testing the resistance of the handcuffs behind his back, and directed his gaze not at the police, but past them, toward Detective Miller. He put on his best reasonable man face, the one he used to wear when he was trying to talk his way out of a speeding ticket or charm a waitress into giving him a free refill. "Officer, please," Gordon said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This is a massive overreaction. Look at us. We are not criminals. We are a respectable family. My daughter." He jerked his head toward me. "Is having a mental health crisis. She is confused. We were just trying to help her manage her assets. Surely we can discuss this like civilized men without the jewelry." He chuckled nervously, expecting Miller to share the joke. Miller did not chuckle. He didn't even blink. He placed a small digital recorder on the table between them and pressed a button. A red light blinked on. "State your name for the recording," Miller said, his voice flat. "I am trying to explain to you," Gordon snapped, the charm evaporating. "This is a civil dispute, a family matter. You have no jurisdiction to arrest a father for helping his daughter with a renovation loan." "Bank fraud is not a family matter, Mr. Hollis," Miller said, "and neither is identity theft. You are not being arrested for a dispute. You are being arrested for a felony." Across the room, the reality finally hit Bryce. He wasn't looking at the cops anymore. He was looking at me. His face was blotchy, sweat beading on his upper lip. Panic had stripped away his usual arrogance, leaving something raw and ugly underneath. "You did this," Bryce spat at me. "You actually did this, you selfish witch. You are sending your own brother to jail? Over money? Over a house you don't even live in half the time?" He lurched forward, but the officer behind him tightened his grip. Bryce stumbled back, colliding with Tessa. What happened next made my stomach turn. Instead of checking on her, instead of moving away to give the pregnant woman space, Bryce grabbed her arm. He pulled her in front of him, maneuvering her body between himself and the police officer, using her swollen belly as a physical barrier. "You are stressing her out," Bryce screamed, his voice cracking. "She is pregnant. If you take me, who is going to take care of her? Mara doesn't care about the baby. She wants to kill this family. Look at her. She is standing there laughing." I wasn't laughing. I was standing perfectly still. My hands clasped in front of me to hide the fact that they were shaking, but I wasn't shaking from fear. I was shaking from the sheer, icy realization of how right I had been to cut them off. "I am not the one who forged a signature. Bryce," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the small room, it cut through his screaming like a razor. "I am not the one who took out a $150,000 loan in someone else's name. I am not the one who broke into a house with a sledgehammer. You did those things. I am just the one who turned on the lights." "It was for us," Bryce yelled, tightening his grip on Tessa's arm until she winced. "We needed a start. You have everything. You have the job, the money, the house. Why couldn't you just share?" "Stealing isn't sharing," I said. "Enough," Detective Miller barked. He stepped closer to Gordon, holding a file folder that I recognized. It wasn't the one I had brought. It was one he had brought with him. "Mr. Hollis?" Miller said, opening the folder. "You keep claiming this was a misunderstanding. You claim you didn't know that signing as a witness to a forged document was a crime. You claim you thought you were just helping with paperwork." "Exactly," Gordon said, seizing the lifeline. "I am an old man. I don't understand these modern banking apps. I just signed where they told me to." Miller looked down at the file. "That is interesting, because according to your employment records, you spent 22 years working as a senior underwriter for State Farm Insurance. Is that correct?" Gordon's mouth snapped shut. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. "And before that," Miller continued, reading from the page, "you worked for 5 years in commercial claims adjusting. In those roles, Part of your job description was verifying the authenticity of signatures on binding contracts and notarized affidavits. Is that correct? The room went deadly silent. You are not a confused senior citizen, Mr. Hollis, Miller said, closing the folder with a soft thump. You are a professional who knows exactly what a witness signature means. You knew that by signing that document, you were attesting to the identity of the borrower. You used your professional knowledge to facilitate a fraud because you thought your daughter wouldn't prosecute. That proves intent. That takes accident off the table. Gordon slumped. His shoulders collapsed inward. The mistake defense was dead. The confused dad act was dead. He was just a con man in a blazer, and he knew he had been caught. That was when Elaine broke. She had been sobbing quietly, but seeing Gordon defeated triggered something frantic in her. She couldn't accept that the narrative had flipped. She needed to make the police understand that they were the good people. We didn't mean to keep the money, Elaine blurted out. Her voice was high and shrill. You don't understand. We were drowning in debt. The house was just sitting there. We just needed the house standing in your name to borrow temporarily. We were going to pay it back as soon as the flip was done. Click. I looked at the recorder on the table. The little red light was still blinking. We just needed the house standing in your name to borrow temporarily. She had just confessed to the motive. She had admitted they viewed my home not as a residence, but as an asset to be leveraged without my consent. She had admitted the loan was premeditated. Detective Miller looked at Elaine. Thank you, Mrs. Hollis. That statement has been recorded. Elaine covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes widening as she realized what she had done. She looked at Gordon, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. He was staring at the floor, defeated. The officers began to move them toward the door. All right, let's go. Watch your heads. Wait, I said. The officer holding Bryce paused. Bryce looked at me with hatred, but I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at Tessa. She was standing alone now that Bryce had been pulled away from her. She looked small, terrified, and utterly lost. She was the collateral damage I hadn't calculated for, but she was also the only variable in the room that still had a chance. I walked over to the table and picked up a brochure I had placed there earlier, underneath my portfolio. I walked toward Tessa. Don't talk to her, Bryce screamed, struggling against the cuffs. Tessa, don't listen to her. She is trying to brainwash you. I ignored him. I stopped 2 feet from Tessa. I didn't touch her. I didn't hug her. I respected the space she needed. Tessa, I said, I am not going to ask you to testify. The police have enough without you, but I want you to look at what just happened. Tessa looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. Look at how he used you, I said, tilting my head toward Bryce, who was currently cursing at a police officer. He didn't ask if you were okay. He didn't ask about the baby. He grabbed you and used you as a shield. He tried to hide behind your pregnancy to avoid jail. Tessa let out a shaky breath, her hand trembling on her stomach. He told you I gave them the house, I said. He lied. He told you there was a secure future. He lied. There is no money. Tessa, there is only debt and fraud. If you stay with him, this is your life. Standing in rooms like this, watching him blame everyone else for his crimes. I held out the brochure. It was from a local organization called Safe Harbor, a group that helped women disentangle their finances from abusive or fraudulent partners. If you didn't know, I said, keeping my voice low and urgent, then you are a victim, and you need to get out before you go down with them. But if you did know, Tessa, if you knew and you went along with it, then you are digging a hole that your child is going to have to climb out of. I pressed the brochure into her hand. Take this. Call the number on the back. They can help you find emergency housing that isn't paid for with stolen money. Tessa looked down at the paper. Then she looked at Bryce. For the first time, the adoration was gone from her eyes. She wasn't looking at the fun, charming boyfriend who promised her the world. She was looking at a man in handcuffs who had just tried to use her body to block an arrest. Bryce, Tessa said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the room, it was deafening. You told me she signed the papers. You swore on the baby's life that she signed the papers. It doesn't matter, Bryce yelled. We were going to fix it. I did it for us. No, Tessa said, taking a step back, away from him. You did it for you. She clutched the brochure to her chest and turned to the female officer. I would like to go now, separately, please. Tessa, Bryce screamed as the officer led him out. Tessa, come back! Don't leave me with them! The door closed on his screams. Elaine was led out next, sobbing quietly now, looking old and frail. Gordon went last. He paused at the door and looked back at me one last time. There was no anger left in his face, just a profound, empty confusion, as if he still couldn't understand how the script he had written for my life had been rewritten by someone else. Then he was gone. The room was suddenly very large and very quiet. Detective Miller clicked off the recorder. He picked it up and slipped it into his pocket. You handled that well, Ms. Hollis, he said. The mother's confession seals the conspiracy charge, and your father's employment history buries the defense. We have everything we need. Thank you, Detective, I said. He nodded and walked out to process the booking, leaving me alone in the conference room. I looked at the empty chairs. 5 minutes ago, my family had been sitting there, convinced they owned me. Now, they were in the back of patrol cars, heading to a holding facility. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't triumph. It was the dull, aching phantom pain of a limb that had been gangrenous for a long time and had finally, mercifully, been amputated. I picked up my portfolio. I walked over to the window and looked down at the street. I saw the flashing lights of the cruisers fading into the Savannah traffic. They were gone. But the war wasn't over. The arrest was just the opening battle. Now came the public fallout, the legal grinding, and the reconstruction of a life that had been targeted for demolition. I turned away from the window. I had a house to fix, and for the first time in my life, the only blueprint I had to follow was my own. The 48 hours following the arrests were not filled with peace. They were filled with noise. My family made bail. I knew they would. Their charges were non-violent financial crimes, and Gordon had a clean record and deep ties to the community, but I had expected them to go home, hide their heads in shame, and call a defense attorney. I had underestimated Elaine Hollis. My mother did not hide. She went live. It started on Friday morning. I was in my home office, trying to draft a structural assessment for a client, when my phone began to vibrate across the desk like a panicked insect, notification after notification, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I picked it up and opened the first link sent to me by a concerned friend. It was a video of Elaine. She was sitting in her kitchen, bathed in soft, forgiving natural light. She was wearing no makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy bun that suggested sleepless nights. She looked 20 years older than she had in the conference room. I don't usually do this, she whispered into the camera, wiping a dry eye. But I don't know where else to turn. My heart is shattered. On Thursday, my husband, a man who has served this community for 30 years, and my son were dragged away in handcuffs. Why? Because we tried to help my daughter. She took a shaky breath, looking directly into the lens. We went to her house to surprise her with a renovation, to make space for her new nephew, and instead of thanking us, she called the police. She told them we were thieves. She let her own father sleep in a cell because he moved a wall she didn't like. Please pray for Mara. I don't know what has happened to her soul, but she has chosen bricks and mortar over her own flesh and blood. The video had 12,000 views. The comments were a landslide of vitriol. Ungrateful brat. I hope she rots in that big house alone. Call Child Protective Services on her. She sounds dangerous. I put the phone down. My hand was shaking. Not from fear, but from the sheer, suffocating weight of the gaslighting. She had completely erased the fraud. She had erased the forged signature. She had erased the $150,000 loan. In her version of reality, I was just a petty tyrant who hated charity. Then the flying monkeys arrived. My phone rang. It was Aunt Janice, Gordon's sister. Mara Elizabeth, she barked the moment I answered. I just saw your mother's video. Have you lost your mind? Your father is a deacon. You are dragging the Hollis name through the mud over a misunderstanding. He forged my signature, Aunt Janice, I said, keeping my voice steady. He tried to mortgage my house. Oh, stop it, she snapped. He was going to pay it back. That is what families do. We cover for each other. You are humiliating us. Drop the charges, Mara, or don't bother coming to Christmas, or Easter, or any funeral. I wasn't planning on it, I said, and hung up. But the personal attacks I could handle. I had built thick walls around my emotions years ago. What I hadn't anticipated was the professional shrapnel. At 2 p.m, I received an email from the Larkspur Heritage Studio. It was from the client I was supposed to be meeting on Monday, a wealthy couple restoring a carriage house in the Starland district. Dear Ms. Hollis, in light of recent social media circulation regarding your personal legal situation, we feel it is best to pause our contract. We need a team that is focused and stable. We will be seeking other bids. I stared at the screen. My stomach dropped. Elaine's narrative wasn't just hurting my feelings, it was attacking my credibility to a client. A structural engineer who arrests her family looks unstable, volatile, risky. If I lost my reputation, I lost my ability to pay for the house I had just fought to save. I stood up and paced the room. The urge to reply to Elaine's video was overwhelming. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to post the audio of her confessing. I wanted to post the mugshots. No, I told myself, that is what they want. They want a mud fight. If I engaged in a comment war, I looked just as messy as them. I needed to respond like an engineer, not a daughter. I needed to respond with data. I sat back down. I opened a new spreadsheet. I began to catalog the attacks. Source, Elaine Hollis. Facebook page. Claim, we were just fixing the house. Refutation. Police report, 49220. Possession of burglary tools. Destruction of property. Source, Bryce Hollis. Instagram story. Claim, she hates my unborn child. Refutation. Restraining order affidavit. Bryce used pregnancy as leverage for extortion. I compiled every post, every threat, every lie. I sent the file to Sarah, my civil lawyer, with the subject line, grounds for defamation suit. Then, the doorbell rang. I jumped. I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the camera feed on my phone before approaching the door. It wasn't a reporter. It was Mr. Henderson, the neighbor who lived directly across the street. He was a retired tech guy who had a camera system that rivaled the Pentagon's. I opened the door. Ms. Hollis, he said, holding out a USB drive. I saw the commotion the other day, and I saw that video your mother posted. My wife showed it to me. I am sorry about the noise, Mr. Henderson, I said. Don't apologize, he said gruffly. I hate liars. Your mother said on that video that they came over to surprise you and knocked, but you weren't home. So they let themselves in to start working. She said it was a spontaneous act of kindness. That is her story, I agreed. Well, Mr. Henderson tapped the USB drive. My camera picks up everything on the street. This footage is from Tuesday morning, 3 hours before you got home. I took the drive. What is on it? It shows your mother and father parking down the block, he said. They walked up to your porch. Your mother didn't knock. She took a key out of her purse immediately, and before they went in, your father walked around the perimeter and disabled your motion sensor light. He used a pair of wire cutters. My breath hitched. That is not a surprise visit, Mr. Henderson said. That is a break-in. And disabling the sensor? That is premeditation. I thought you might want this for your lawyer. Mr. Henderson, I said, clutching the drive like it was a diamond. You have no idea. I went back inside and plugged the drive in. The video was crisp and clear in 4K resolution. There was Gordon, looking around suspiciously, cutting the wire to my security light. There was Elaine, checking her phone, then unlocking the door with the key she had stolen from Mrs. Gable. They looked like professional thieves. This was the nail in the coffin of the innocent family narrative. But I didn't post the video. That was evidence for the courtroom. Instead, I drafted a statement. I kept it short. I kept it cold. I stripped away every adjective, every emotion, every ounce of drama. I wrote it as a public notice. I opened my own social media pages, which had been silent until now. I posted a single image. It was a black square with white text. Regarding the recent statements made by Elaine and Bryce Hollis. This is not a domestic dispute. This is an active criminal investigation involving financial fraud. Case number, Savannah PD, 258890, charges filed. 1. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud. 2. Identity theft, first degree. 3. Forgery of financial instruments. 4. Felony vandalism. The allegations involve the forgery of my signature on a secured loan application totaling $150,000, using my home as collateral without my consent. Relevant evidence, including video surveillance of forced entry and notarized bank documents, has been turned over to the district attorney. I will not be commenting further as this matter is now before the Superior Court. I hit post. Then I tagged the local news station that had shared Elaine's sob story. The reaction was immediate. The internet loves a villain, but it loves a receipt even more. Within an hour, the tone of the comments on Elaine's video began to shift. Wait, she forged a loan? 150 grand? That is not a renovation. That is a heist. I just looked up the case number. It is real. Holy cow. The mom is lying. The poor family narrative collapsed under the weight of the case number. People started asking Elaine why she needed a loan if she was just helping. They started asking why Gordon was charged with identity theft if it was just a misunderstanding. Elaine deleted her video 2 hours later. The silence that followed was satisfying. My phone stopped buzzing with insults and started buzzing with apologies from people who had jumped to conclusions. But the most satisfying message came at 9 that night. It was from Bryce. He must have seen the tide turning. He must have realized that the court of public opinion had just convicted them. Mara. The text read, "Please, this is getting out of hand. Dad is having chest pains. We can't afford a trial. I can get a job. I can pay you back. I will give you $500 a month. Just drop the fraud charges. Please." I stared at the screen. $500 a month. It would take him 25 years to pay off the damage they caused, let alone the loan amount if I hadn't caught it. Then, a second text bubbled up, revealing the real Bryce. "But if you don't drop it, I swear to God, you will regret it. You are destroying this family. If Tessa leaves me, that is on you. You break us. You pay the price." He was trying to negotiate and threaten in the same breath. He was terrified, but he was still trying to bully me. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot. I opened the evidence folder. I dropped the image into a subfolder I had named Witness Intimidation. I forwarded the screenshot to Detective Miller with a short note. "Defendant Bryce Hollis is contacting the victim in violation of the no-contact order. Please revoke bail." I put the phone down and looked out the window at the street lamp flickering on. Mr. Henderson's house was dark, but his camera was watching. They had tried to use the court of public opinion to bury me. They didn't realize that in the court of public opinion, facts are the only currency that matters in the long run. I had cleared my name. Now, I was going to clear the board. I thought the arrest was the bottom. I thought seeing my father in handcuffs and hearing my mother confess to the recorder was the maximum depth of the betrayal. I assumed that once the police report was filed, the surprises would stop and the paperwork would begin. I was wrong. The arrest was just the surface crack. The rot went all the way down to the bedrock. On Monday morning, I was back at the main branch of the Coastal Heritage Credit Union. This time, I was not sitting in a cubicle with a customer service representative. I was in a glass-walled office on the 4th floor with the Vice President of Risk Management and their lead compliance officer. The bank was terrified. They had issued a 6-figure loan on a fraudulent signature, witnessed by a man they had trusted, and the money was almost released to a co-conspirator. They were looking at a lawsuit, and they knew it. To mitigate the damage, they had decided to open the books wide. Ms. Hollis, the compliance officer said, sliding a thick stack of paper across the desk. In the process of freezing the home equity line of credit, we ran a full audit on all accounts linked to your Social Security number within our institution. We found irregularities. Irregularities? I asked. I only have a checking account here. You have a checking account, he corrected. But 3 months ago, an application was submitted for a Platinum Rewards credit card. It was approved with a limit of $20,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. I never applied for a credit card. The card was issued, he continued, his voice grim, and it was maxed out within 19 days. Cash advances at casinos in Biloxi, electronic stores, a down payment on a leasing agreement for a luxury SUV. Who signed for it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He turned the monitor around. The signature was a clumsy attempt at mine, but the contact information was the smoking gun. The phone number listed is your brother's cell, he said. But the billing address, that is what flagged our system. It is not your home address. It is a post office box in Garden City. I wrote down the box number. I left the bank and drove straight to the post office in Garden City. It was a 20-minute drive. Time I spent gripping the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white. When I arrived, I showed the clerk my ID and the police report number. I need to know who owns Box 402, I said. The clerk looked it up. That box is registered to an Elaine Hollis. The world tilted on its axis. My mother hadn't just intercepted a few letters. She had rented a separate mailing address months ago. She had systematically diverted my financial mail, pre-approved offers, bank statements, tax documents, to a box only she had the key to. This wasn't a crime of opportunity because they were desperate for cash. This was a long-term parasitic infection. She had been curating my identity to steal from me while smiling at me over Sunday dinner. I drove back to my house. The silence inside was heavy. I sat on the floor of the dining room, surrounded by my own notes, and opened the county property records portal on my laptop. If they had the audacity to open credit cards, what else had they tried? I searched my property address. I scrolled through the history. Deed transfer. Sold to Mara Hollis. 2 years ago. Mortgage release. Paid in full. 6 months ago. Then I saw it. A rejected filing from 4 weeks ago. It was a quitclaim deed. I paid the $5 to download the image. It was a document attempting to transfer 50% ownership of my house from Mara Hollis to Bryce Hollis and Mara Hollis as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. If this document had been processed, Bryce would have legally owned half my house. If I died, he would have owned all of it. The clerk had stamped it, rejected in red ink. The reason? Grantor signature does not match file exemplar. Notary seal expired. They had tried to steal the deed itself. They had tried to put Bryce's name on the title so he could legally kick me out or force a sale. And the only reason they failed was that they had used a cheap, incompetent notary or forged the seal badly. My phone rang. It was Noah, the damage assessor. Mara, he said, you need to come down to the dumpster. I found something. I walked out to the large roll-off dumpster sitting in my driveway. Noah was standing there holding a pair of tweezers and a plastic bag. I was sifting through the drywall debris from the parlor, Noah said, trying to separate the plaster for the hazardous material report. I found this crumpled up inside a fast food bag that was tossed in with the rubble. He held up the bag. Inside was a greasy receipt from a burger joint, and stuck to the back of it with ketchup was a torn piece of notebook paper. On it, in my father's distinct, blocky handwriting, were 3 lines. Notary, Tuesday, 2 in the afternoon. Jared, truck rental, 4 o'clock, alibi. Mom calls Mara at 5. I stared at the paper. It was an itinerary for a crime. Tuesday at 2, I whispered. That was 2 hours before I got home. That was when they signed the loan papers at the bank. And Tuesday at 4, Noah pointed out, was when the neighbors saw the truck pull up. They had a schedule. Mara, they weren't just smashing walls. They were executing a timeline. This proves premeditation, I said. This proves they sat down and planned the exact minute they would rob me. I am adding this to the physical evidence log, Noah said. The police will want this. I went back inside and called Detective Miller. I told him about the P.O. box. I told him about the credit card. I told him about the failed deed transfer. We are building a RICO case at this point, Miller said, his tone sounding almost impressed by the scope of the fraud. This is a criminal enterprise. But the final blow to their defense came that afternoon. The bank's legal team called me back. Ms. Hollis, the compliance officer said, we pulled the surveillance footage from the branch for the date of the loan signing, October 14th, 2:15 in the afternoon. I want to see it, I said. They emailed me a secure link. I clicked play. The video showed the bank lobby. I saw my father, Gordon, walking in. He was wearing his Sunday best suit. He looked confident. He was shaking hands with the loan officer. And walking next to him was a woman. She was wearing a long wig that matched my hair color. She was wearing a trench coat and sunglasses, even though she was indoors. She kept her head down. But I knew the walk. I knew the way she clutched her purse with both hands against her chest. It was my mother, Elaine. She sat down. She signed Mara Hollis on the document. Gordon signed next to her. They laughed with the banker. They took a lollipop from the jar on the counter. My father had claimed I signed it and forgot. My mother had claimed on Facebook that she was just a confused old lady. The video showed two predators calmly eating the prey. I forwarded the video to Detective Miller. Subject: Identification of impersonator. File attached. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up. It was a text from Gordon's number. He must have gotten his phone back after making bail, or he was using a burner. Mara, honey, please, think about what you are doing. I spoke to the doctor today. My heart is in atrial fibrillation. The stress is killing me. Do you want to be the reason your father has a stroke? We can fix the money. Just tell them you remembered signing it. Say you were tired. Say it was a mistake. If you don't, I might not survive the trial. It was the ultimate trump card. The health scare. The I am dying defense. For a second, the old Mara, the daughter who was trained to fix everything, flinched. I felt that familiar spike of panic. What if he dies? What if I am killing him? Then I looked at the screenshot of the itinerary. Alibi. Mom calls Mara at 5. I looked at the rejected deed where they tried to take half my house. I looked at the credit card bill with the casino charges. His heart wasn't failing from stress. His heart was failing because it was rotten. I did not reply. I took a screenshot of the text. I sent it to Sarah, my lawyer. Add this to the harassment file. I wrote, and file a motion to revoke his bail. He is contacting the witness to coerce perjury. Then I blocked the number. I sat in the middle of my ruined living room. The dust was still in the air. The walls were still open wounds. But for the first time, I saw the structure clearly. The house could be fixed. I could buy new drywall. I could hire honest contractors. I could sand the floors and repaint the trim. But the family? The family was a condemned building. The foundation was sand. The beams were termite-ridden. There was nothing there worth saving. I picked up my phone and called the contractor Noah had recommended. This is Mara Hollis, I said. I am ready to start the restoration, but I want to change the scope of work. What do you need? The contractor asked. I don't just want the wall fixed, I said. I want the locks changed to biometric scanners. I want steel-reinforced doors, and I want a perimeter fence that no one can cut through. Sounds like a fortress, he said. No, I said, looking at the empty spot where my family used to sit. It is a sanctuary, and I'm closing the gate. I had peeled back every layer of the onion, and there was nothing at the center but greed. They hadn't just come for the house. They had come for my life. They wanted my credit, my assets, my name, and my future. They wanted to consume me until there was nothing left but a husk they could toss aside. But they forgot one thing. I was a structural engineer. I knew how to spot a load that was too heavy to carry. And I had just dropped it. By Wednesday, The conference table in Sarah Jenkins's office looked less like a legal workspace and more like a war room. The surface was buried under stacks of manila folders, each one representing a different nail in the coffin we were building for the Hollis family. Sarah sat at the head of the table, clicking a ballpoint pen. Marcus Thorne, the criminal attorney, was pacing by the window. "We have the full spread," Sarah said, tapping the largest stack. "Felony vandalism, burglary, identity theft in the first degree, wire fraud, and thanks to your neighbors and that dashcam footage, we have conspiracy." "It is a strong case," Marcus agreed, stopping his pacing. "But the district attorney is wobbling on the sentencing recommendation. He is still getting calls from the community. People saying Gordon is an old man with a heart condition. They want probation and restitution. They don't want prison time." "Restitution?" I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "They don't have the money for restitution. They spent the loan money on casinos and car leases. If they get probation, I never see a dime. And they spend the rest of their lives stalking me." "That is why we need the civil judgment to stick before the criminal plea deal happens," Sarah said. "We need to prove the financial damage is so catastrophic that probation is an insult to justice." She opened the report Noah Granger had finalized that morning. I had braced myself for the number. I thought I was ready. I was an engineer. I knew what materials cost. I had estimated maybe $30,000 or $40,000 in my head. "The final assessment is in," Sarah said, sliding the paper toward me. "Structural damage, historical preservation fines for unauthorized demolition of a protected interior, emergency shoring costs, and material restoration." I looked at the bottom line. $92,450. I stared at the number. $92,000? I whispered. "How? They only smashed 2 walls." "They cut the main load-bearing beam for the second floor." Noah's note in the margin read, "The entire upper level has shifted 3 inches. We have to jack up the house to fix it. Plus, the plaster they destroyed was original 1890s horsehair plaster. To restore it to the historic district standards, we have to hire artisans, not just drywall guys." "I can't pay this," I said, feeling the blood leave my face. "Even with my salary, I can't pay this out of pocket." "That brings us to the insurance," Sarah said, her expression grim. She pulled out a letter from my insurance provider. The header was stamped, "Denied." "They are claiming the family exclusion clause," Sarah explained. "Standard homeowner policies do not cover damage caused by residents or relatives of the insured. They are arguing that since Gordon is your father and had a key, even a stolen one, this is a domestic dispute, not a crime." "They are calling it a domestic dispute?" I stood up, the chair screeching against the floor. "He is charged with 6 felonies. He forged a loan. He broke in." "We know that," Sarah said calmly, "and that is how we beat them. We sent the police report and the fraud affidavit to the insurance adjuster this morning. We are forcing them to reclassify this from vandalism by invitee to malicious mischief by third party. Once the fraud charges are official, the insurance company has to pay, but it is going to be a fight." I sank back into the chair. It felt like I was fighting a hydra. Every time I cut off one head, the police, the bank, 2 more grew back in the form of insurance adjusters and soft-hearted prosecutors. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "He is trying to make her send it." Attached was a screenshot. It was a text conversation. The sender was, "Bryce, do not answer." The recipient, presumably, was Tessa. The text from Bryce read, "Babe, please, just text Mara. Tell her the stress is hurting the baby. Tell her if she doesn't drop the charges, you might miscarry. She will cave. She always caves. Do it for me. I can't go to jail." I waited for the response in the screenshot. I waited to see Tessa agreeing, or apologizing, or playing the victim. But there was no response, just a timestamp showing the message had been read and ignored 6 hours ago. Tessa hadn't sent the text. She hadn't called me begging for mercy. She had sent the screenshot to me, or asked a lawyer to do it, to show me she was done playing his game. "Bryce is getting desperate," I said, showing the phone to Marcus. He is trying to coerce Tessa into manipulating me. Save it, Marcus said, his eyes lighting up. That is witness tampering. If he is pressuring a potential witness to falsify a medical condition to influence the plaintiff, he just violated his bail conditions again. But the real bomb dropped at 4 in the afternoon. I was back at my house, meeting with the contractor to discuss the emergency shoring. When my phone rang, the caller ID was blocked. Usually, I didn't answer blocked numbers, but something told me to pick up. Hello? Is this Mara Hollis? A woman's voice, older, raspy. It sounded vaguely familiar, like a voice from a childhood barbecue I barely remembered. Yes, this is she. You don't know me well, the voice said. I am your second cousin, Brenda, from Macon. Oh, I said, racking my brain. Hello, Brenda. I saw the news, Brenda said. I saw what Gordon did to your house, and I saw what he tried to do with the loan. It has been a difficult week, I said cautiously. Listen to me. Honey, Brenda lowered her voice. He did it to me in 1998. I froze. Excuse me? Your father, she said. When my husband died, Gordon came down to help me manage the estate. He had me sign papers I didn't understand. Said it was for tax purposes. 6 months later, I found out he had taken a $20,000 commission for selling my husband's truck to his friend for pennies. I never prosecuted because family. My grip on the phone tightened. Why are you telling me this now? Because he called me an hour ago, Brenda said. He asked if he could park his boat in my barn, and he asked if I could cash a check for him because he didn't want it going through his main account. He is moving assets, I said. He told me he is protecting his retirement from an ungrateful daughter, Brenda scoffed. I told him to go to hell, but Mara, if he called me, he called others. He is liquidating. He is going to hide every penny he has so when the judge orders restitution, he can plead poverty. Thank you, Brenda, I said. You have no idea how much this helps. Nail him, Brenda said. For all of us. I hung up and immediately dialed Sarah. Emergency motion, I said the second she answered. Gordon is moving assets. He is trying to hide his liquidity to avoid the civil judgment. Do you have proof? Sarah asked. I have a witness testimony from a relative he solicited to launder a check, I said, and I have a tip that he is moving titled property. I am filing for an ex parte asset freeze immediately, Sarah said. We will lock every account, every title, and every vehicle in his name by 5 o'clock. If he sells a toaster oven after I file this, he goes to jail for contempt. The next 3 hours were a blur of paperwork. We faxed urgent requests to the DMV, the banks, and the county recorder. We cast a net over Gordon Hollis's life so tight he wouldn't be able to buy a pack of gum without a judge's permission. By 8 o'clock that night, the dust had settled. The motion was granted. The accounts were frozen. The trap was welded shut. I sat on the floor of my ruined parlor. The contractor had installed temporary steel jacks to hold up the ceiling. They looked like ugly, industrial ribs in the belly of my Victorian home. The air still smelled of dust, but the silence was different tonight. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of anticipation. Tomorrow was the preliminary hearing. Tomorrow. I would stand in a courtroom and look my father in the eye, not as his daughter, but as the plaintiff in State of Georgia versus Gordon Hollis. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a message from a neighbor I barely spoke to, a woman who lived 3 streets over. I just wanted you to know, the message read, that my husband and I were talking. We always thought your parents were so nice, but after seeing the evidence you posted, we realized that nice is just a mask. You are brave for taking the mask off. We are rooting for you. I put the phone down on the floor. For days, I had been telling myself I was doing this for the house. I was doing it for the money. I was doing it because I had no choice. But sitting there in the dark, watching the moonlight filter through the cracks in the walls, I realized the truth. I wasn't doing this to get paid back. I probably would never see the full $92,000. Gordon would declare bankruptcy. Bryce would be indigent. I was doing this because for 34 years, I had been a prop in their play. I had been the obedient daughter, the safety net, the bank account, the retirement plan. They had conditioned me to believe that my value lay in what I could provide for them. Tomorrow, I wasn't going to court to get revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. I was going to court to get an eviction notice, not for the house. They were already gone from the house. I was evicting them from my head. I was evicting the guilt. I was evicting the obligation. "You don't own me," I whispered to the empty room. I stood up and brushed the drywall dust off my jeans. I checked the locks. The new, heavy-duty deadbolts I had installed that afternoon. I set the alarm. I went upstairs to the only bedroom that was still habitable. I set my alarm for 6 in the morning. I was going to sleep well tonight, because tomorrow, the demolition ended, and the renovation of Mara Hollis began. The courtroom was colder than I expected. It was a sterile, windowless box in the Chatham County Courthouse. Smelling of floor wax and old anxiety, I sat at the plaintiff's table, my spine pressed against the hard wood of the chair, watching the people who used to be my family file in on the other side of the aisle. Gordon walked in first. He was not wearing the arrogant blazer from the conference room. He was wearing a rumpled button-down shirt, looking frail and confused, a calculated costume designed to elicit sympathy. Elaine followed, clutching a tissue, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. Bryce slumped in his chair, staring at the table, refusing to look at me. The hearing was technically for the permanent protective order and the preliminary evidence submission for the civil suit, but the shadow of the criminal charges hung over the room like a guillotine. Gordon's lawyer, a court-appointed public defender who looked exhausted before the day had even begun, stood up. "Your Honor," he began, his voice weary, "this is, at its core, a domestic misunderstanding. My client, Mr. Hollis, is a loving father who attempted to assist his daughter with home renovations. The situation escalated due to poor communication and high emotions. We believe a restraining order is excessive. This family needs counseling, not court orders." He gestured to Gordon, who dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief. It was a good performance. For a moment, I saw the judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, look at Gordon with a flicker of pity. Then, my lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, stood up. She didn't use adjectives. She didn't use emotion. She picked up a flash drive and a stack of financial records. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the performative grief, "we are not here because of a renovation. We are here because of a systematic attempt to defraud the plaintiff of $150,000. The defense claims this was help. We have evidence that proves it was a heist." Sarah submitted the bank surveillance footage. She submitted the rejected deed transfer where they tried to steal half my equity. She submitted the itinerary found in the trash. But the nail in the coffin was the audio recording. "Plaintiff's Exhibit D," Sarah announced, "audio recorded during a meeting between the parties on Thursday, December 22nd. She pressed play. The courtroom speakers crackled, and then, clear as a bell, Elaine's voice filled the room. "We didn't mean to keep the money. We just needed the house standing in your name to borrow temporarily. We were going to pay it back as soon as the flip was done." The silence that followed was absolute. The judge looked at Elaine. Elaine shrank into her seat, the tissue forgotten in her hand. The confused grandmother mask slipped, revealing the calculator underneath. "Mrs. Hollis," the judge said, her voice icy, "did you believe that you had the legal right to leverage your daughter's property without her consent?" Elaine stammered. We are family. What is hers is ours." "That is not how the law works," the judge snapped. "That is how a cartel works." The gavel did not bang, but the judgment was felt in the air. The defense lawyer closed his folder. He knew it was over. There was no spinning a confession like that. The ruling came swiftly, and it hit them like the sledgehammer they had taken to my walls. "The court grants the permanent protective order," the judge ruled. "Mr. Gordon Hollis, Mrs. Elaine Hollis, and Mr. Bryce Hollis are ordered to stay 500 yards away from the plaintiff, her home, and her place of employment. Any violation will result in immediate incarceration. The judge turned to the civil matters. Regarding the damages, the court finds the defendants liable for the full cost of restoration, estimated at $92,450. Furthermore, the court orders an immediate freeze on all assets belonging to Gordon and Elaine Hollis to ensure these funds are available for restitution. Gordon let out a choked sound. His retirement fund, his boat, his safety net, it was all locked down. He wasn't going to be spending his golden years fishing. He was going to be spending them paying for the drywall he destroyed. Finally, the judge looked at Elaine. Regarding the social media posts, you are ordered to remove all defamatory statements regarding the plaintiff immediately. Failure to do so will be considered contempt of court. Elaine nodded, tears of genuine defeat streaming down her face. But the day wasn't over. As the bailiff moved to escort them out, the door at the back of the courtroom opened. A representative from the Coastal Heritage Credit Union walked in, accompanied by a federal investigator. They approached the bench and conferred with the prosecutor. Minutes later, the announcement was made. The bank had officially classified the loan as fraud. The debt was removed from my name entirely. The investigation was now a federal criminal case against Gordon and Bryce. They weren't just leaving with a restraining order. They were leaving with a date for a criminal trial that would likely end in federal prison. As they were led out, Bryce stopped. He looked back, not at me, but at the gallery. Tessa was sitting there. She had come separately. She was sitting 2 rows behind me, near the exit. "Tessa!" Bryce called out, his voice desperate. "Tessa, wait! Tell them! Tell them we did it for the baby!" Tessa stood up. She looked tired, but she didn't look scared anymore. She walked to the railing. "I spoke to the investigator, Bryce," Tessa said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I told them everything you told me. I told them about the lies. I told them how you said Mara gave us the house." Bryce's face went white. "You ratted me out?" "I saved myself," Tessa said. She placed a hand on her stomach. "And I am saving this baby from having a father who uses him as a shield. I am done, Bryce." She turned and walked out of the courtroom. She didn't look at me, and I didn't look at her. We didn't need to exchange words. She had taken the exit ramp I offered, and that was enough. I walked out of the courthouse alone. The sun was shining in Savannah, bright and blinding. I checked my phone. An email from the bank. Loan 49902. Closed, void. An email from my insurance company. Claim approved. Check for restoration enclosed. I got into my car and drove home. When I pulled up to the curb, the house looked different. The dumpster was gone. The contractor had finished the emergency shoring. The front door had been replaced with a solid oak slab reinforced with a steel core. I walked up the steps. I didn't fumble for a key. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. Beep, click. The heavy bolts retracted with a solid mechanical thud. I stepped inside. The parlor was still a work in progress. The walls were stripped down to the studs, smelling of raw wood and potential. But the dust was gone. The debris was gone. The chaotic energy of my family was gone. I walked to the center of the room, standing exactly where Gordon had stood with his sledgehammer. I looked at the space where the wall used to be. I would rebuild it. I would make it stronger. I would use better materials this time. Materials that couldn't be broken by cheap tools and cheaper manipulation. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the security system. Perimeter secure. No motion detected. For 34 years, I had been afraid of being alone. My parents had programmed me to believe that without them, I was nothing. They told me that family was the only thing that mattered, even when that family was eating me alive. I took a deep breath. The air in the house was still, quiet, and mine. I wasn't lonely. I was fortified. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of wine. I stood by the window, watching the street. I saw a car slow down, a sedan that looked like my aunt's car. It lingered for a second. then saw the security cameras, saw the new fence, and sped away. The restraining order was working. The boundary was holding. I took a sip of wine. Most people think the happy ending of a revenge story is when the villains beg for forgiveness. They think the victory is hearing the words, "I am sorry." But standing there in my broken, beautiful house, I realized that was a lie. I didn't need their apology. An apology is just words, and my family had proven that their words were counterfeit currency. I didn't need them to say they were sorry. I needed them to be gone. And as the sun set over Savannah, casting long shadows across the floorboards I had paid for with my own sweat and saved with my own spine, I smiled. They had tried to destroy my home to bind me to them forever. Instead, they had handed me the sledgehammer to break the chains. I raised my glass to the empty room. "Get off my lawn," I whispered. And for the first time in my life, I knew they had no choice but to obey. Thank you so much for listening to this story of boundaries, betrayal, and absolute justice. It is a wild ride when the people who are supposed to protect you become the ones you need protection from. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while driving to work in London? Cooking dinner in Texas? Or maybe winding down for the night in Sydney? Drop a comment below with your location and let me know. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with a family member like Mara did? If you enjoyed seeing Mara reclaim her house and her life, please make sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to support the channel, and smash the hype button so this story can reach even more people who might need a reminder that no is a complete sentence. Stay safe, stay strong, and protect your peace.